Thank you very much for joining us. I'm really looking forward to this panel this evening. Unfortunately, one of our authors hasn't been able to join us, Salma Ibrahim. She's not very well today and she apologises for not being here. But I do really want to flag her fabulous first novel, Salutation Road, which was published last year. It's been described as beautifully told. It's a speculative literary novel about the everyday struggles of immigration, love, and letting go of the past that never really existed. It's fabulous. It tells the story of a young woman who finds herself transported from London to Mogadishu, where she encounters a family that's sort of parallel to her own. But then when her twin turns up in London, this sort of twin from Mogadishu, it leads her to start to uncover these exploitative research, exploitative research project that's using the teleporting bus facilities. I hope that gives you a sense of, like, it's really intriguing and has really interesting resonances with a lot of what we're going to be talking about this evening. It is for sale over there, as are Samatar's book, The Epic of Kedah Idris, Amna's books, Scattered, and also Manafay. So yeah, we'll have time at the end if you wish to buy the books over at the bookstall over there. So let me introduce the speakers who are here. I'm going to introduce them all. I'm going to sort of be in conversation with them for a little while, and then we'll open up for questions from the audience. Let me start with Amna Mohdin, who's the Guardian's first community affairs correspondent, reporting on the social, political, and economic experiences of the UK's diverse communities, with a particular focus on Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. She was previously a reporter at Courts, where she led the publication's coverage of the European refugee crisis. She's the winner of the British Journalism Award in 2022, and her work has been shortlisted for the British Press Awards. So her memoir, which we'll be discussing this evening, Scattered, The Making and Unmaking of a Refugee, was published last year and was longlisted this year for the Bread and Roses Award. In Scattered, Amna tells us about how that earlier coverage of the European refugee crisis prompted a gradual uncovering of her family's own story, moving from Somalia to Kenya to the Netherlands and to the UK. And in the process, Amna returns to these countries, piecing together this story in a startlingly direct and really moving way. Samatar Elmi is an award-winning writer, musician and educator. His debut pamphlet, Portrait of Colossus, which came out with Fliptie in 2021, was a PBS choice. He's been an Obsidian Fellow and he's an associate editor at Fliptie, and his work has appeared widely and featured on Radio 4. As Nomad Spock, his albums have featured on BBC Radio 6 as well. His collection that we're going to be talking about this evening, and which will be the focus of our discussion this evening, was published last year by Bloomsbury. And the poems traverse music, politics, literature and family amongst a range of themes, whilst maintaining a really impressive kind of coherence and intensity. And at the heart of the collection is the poem inspired by the myth of Kedah Idris, this Welsh mountain, and it's said that those who spend the night on its summit return either as madmen or as poets. And then finally, we're joined by Dahir Afrah, who's the editor of the English version of Manafay, written by her late father, Mohammed Dahir Afrah, who is an author, playwright and theatre critic, and who wrote in Somali, Arabic and English. So it's a story of a family, of love and secrets, and the novel Manafay portrays the tension between the urban and the rural, and the transition from the past way of living to kind of urbanised and modern lifestyles. The novel is focalised around the eponymous Manafay, who falls in love with Ahmed, but whose family have betrothed her to her cousins, more than one. And Manafay's refusal of the arranged marriage is the catalyst of a series of calamities as she falls victim to the predations of others, including to sexual trafficking. So, lots to talk about this evening. I'm going to start. Thank you. Welcome. I'm going to start with a question for Samatar. So your collection is kind of woven through with references to other writers, poems, music in all sorts of ways, including kind of giving musical notation to your poems, and also language. And there's a kind of almost an expanded intertextuality there. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about that approach in your poetry and what kinds of connections and conversations you're invoking in doing that work with your poetry.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I think there's different layers to the answer, really. On the one hand, it's kind of how my mind works, I guess. I enjoy stitching things together. I think also the older I've gotten, the more aware I've become of neurocognitive diversity and neurodivergence. I realised that perhaps having ADHD, which is, well, both ADHD and autism, which is, very prevalent in the Somali community, but also is heavily stigmatised both in our community, but also here. If you think of the way that we categorise neurocognitive diversity, it's either a deficiency or a condition or an impairment, and I think if you look beyond the kind of post-industrial, post-secular society we live in today, indigenous societies the world over were very inclusive and pluralistic in terms of how they understood the cognitive diversity amongst the community. And I think my writing fell into, and I think it's the case for a lot of people, fell into a very kind of neurodivergent way of writing. So the non-linearity of the way that I put together concepts and themes is a natural way of me writing. It's how I think. The tangential nature, again, similar kind of thing. So you can look at all the symptoms of ADHD, and it's there in my writing. Of course it is, because that's how my brain works. So that's one way of answering it. Another way of answering the question would be that from a very early age, I think we, as children of immigrants, we get fascinated, or we are trapped by the idea that capital is merely a financial domain, right? And that the way to access more capital is through education or, to get a better job, etc. But really, the real source of privilege is in this society and in the world is the other forms of capital as well, the social capital, the cultural capital. And I became aware from a very young age, I didn't have a lot of that. So, when people would quote the Greek myths as a way of showing their erudition and their level of education, I'd be like, well, who are they? Who are you talking about? They're not my myths. So it becomes a kind of a project of decolonization to, as Sun Tzu said, know your enemy. If I want to decolonize, I need to understand you and understand all of you, and then use that against you, to spread my message using your myths. So yeah, I think that that's the dual-funged approach to answering your question.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I'm going to move on now to Muna, and it's the one book that we're discussing tonight, which is a translation. The original was first serialized in Somali in 1979 before it was published as a novel. And the translator points out in his introduction that the language of the original kind of evokes a very particular time and place in a way in Mogadishu. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about this. And I'm thinking particularly about the connections between language and culture. I mean, some of, in a way, what Samatar's been talking about too. What can get lost in translation as well?
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Yeah, it's a great question. And, you know, the original Somali version of Manafai had a lot of, you know, cultural nuances and idiomatic language. And that made it powerful, but also a challenge to translate because, yeah, it's difficult. It makes it more accessible to Somali diaspora to be in English, who may find it more challenging to read the Somali version. So that access is very important. However, it's not a complete immersion. For example, in the original version of Manafai, you can get a taste of the Somali language, the rhythm, you know, and the cadence of Somali languages. It's got its roots in, you know, oral storytelling, and that is difficult to track. That can be lost. You know, for example, in Somali, there may be some internal rhyme or alliteration, which adds to the emotion and tension of the storytelling, but that's difficult to translate onto in the English version. Also idioms, you know, there's a lot of idioms and these kind of things that are used in the story to show the beliefs of some of the characters or their moral standings, what they think and feel. And again, they some of them are kept in the story, but they can lose some of their being contextualized can be quite challenging, and also the humor. I mean, I enjoy the humor, you know, Somali humor, you know, a lot of wordplay and a lot of wit, and that it does come through. But again, it is a challenge to translate that without the context of some of the things that are viewed and the social commentary, I would say. So it is a challenge, but I believe it's a challenge that's definitely worthwhile because of the kind of a chance to connect, you know, for Somali diaspora, such as myself, who might have been born abroad or grew up abroad, to have a window into the lives of their parents or grandparents, and discover, yes, some things may be lost in translation, but there's so much more that can be gained, and more curiosity sparked to look into these really fascinating history of Somalia.
Thank you so much. That really, it's interesting seeing how that's kind of brought to life on the page and so on. And I was thinking as you were talking also of that little series of poems of yours, Samatar, etymology, and the way that you kind of play with the sound of the names, but also those kind of that process of kind of translation and almost like an untranslation of those things as well. Yeah, that's really interesting. Let's move to Amna. I know we're going to come back to language a bit more in a while. But Amna, one of the things I found fascinating in your book was how you and your parents had kind of in a way different memories of the past, what you remembered, how you remember, like what you remembered, but also how you remembered events and people. And this, as I understand it, surfaced as you interviewed them for the book. And I wonder, reflecting now, I'd love to hear your thoughts about how memory and nostalgia kind of shape identity, and the differences that you've observed in the generations in your work. Yeah.
Just wanted to say first, Assalamu alaikum, and that I'm very excited to be on this panel with you two, such amazing writers. And I mean, I'm so excited to be back here on Somali Week Festival. It just seems to get better every year. That question on nostalgia and memory. So one of the inspirations for my book was that my Baba was going back to Hamar. He was going back to Mogadishu since 2012. And he had this mission to rebuild the family home and to rebuild his father's hotel. And many of us here know it's not a booming tourist industry yet, but I just didn't understand why do you, after everything that they'd gone through, to leave and start a new life, what was drawing him back. And I realized I actually had to go to Somalia to see it for myself, to see how in so many ways that my father was reliving the past and continuing to also try to remain in the present. So for him, nostalgia and memory is a way to survive, to hold on to a part of himself that was ripped away from him. And I think there's so much power and beauty in refusing to let go of both place and time and language and identity. I think nostalgia for the younger generation can be a bit of a barrier sometimes in kind of forging our identity going forward, because we tend to think a lot about what our parents or the country that we were. So I was in Somalia as a child, but we think about what it was like before. And I think sometimes thinking a lot about the past means that we're not really focused too much on the present and what it can be going forward. So I think memory can play two things. It can be very beautiful, it can be very stabilizing, and it's so important to hold on to those roots. But at the same time, you don't want it to be a shackle to stop you from being innovative and going forward. And I have to say, really, particularly in the past 5 years, that's not very true for a lot of the writers in the diaspora. I think they're doing really interesting and exciting things and making it their own. So, and not just in non-fiction or fiction writing, even in journalism. I think when I was writing about 10 years ago, there really weren't that many Somali journalists in the British media, just one or two of the big names. And in the last 5 years, we've seen a real explosion. But I mean, even just in The Guardian, we recognize each other immediately when you see a Somali person and you say, "What are you?" And then like in the newsroom, we turn around. So we've had 3, hires in the last 5 years who are Somali, who are amazing. And we've had, in the BBC, in the New York Times. So there has been in the last 5 years, a real explosion. It's amazing to see.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Really interesting. I wanted really to kind of open up that question of generational identities. It feels like one that's really relevant to all the work we're discussing. When we were kind of corresponding about it, you talked about it being the kind of stories we choose to pass on and also the stories we choose to let go of. I would kind of love to hear sort of more from all or any of you about that kind of question of the stories we hold on to, that perhaps the new stories that we tell, but also the ones we let go of. I don't know. Muna, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yeah, I'm happy to start off. It's a great question. And the interesting thing, for example, Mana Fai is kind of caught between her parents' generation and their traditional values, and the modern kind of changes that are taking place. And that's something that even today, diaspora and in general young diaspora Somali diaspora can relate to that feeling and her emotional turmoil that she goes through. And in terms of that generational change and that bridge, I feel like even this English translation of Mana Fai acts as kind of like a symbol of what we choose to kind of pass on in terms of culture and history and memory as well, and what tends to fade. And it's great that it can be a bridge. First of all, it's kind of an inheritance and reinterpretation for Somali diaspora, but also it can be a bridge between generations and identities and language as well, which I think is really important.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Samatar, do you want to come in?
It's a really tricky one. with Somali culture in general and Somali history because, you know, it's such a strong oral tradition. But also we kind of are living in the legacy of 1884 without ever really fully realizing it. You know, so I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I'd look at my grandparents and think like, that's the original Somali, not realizing that, you know, they were born a good 60 years after colonization, you know. So what stories that we choose to pass on can be very contested, given especially how oral the traditions. I mean, I know a friend of mine I was growing up with, we both claim the exact same story of a Somali kind of, you know, legendary figure. And, you know, he was telling me the story. I was like, well, that's my great-great-granddad, right? And we, you know, not related at all. So there are, you know, you know, and the audience will know exactly what I mean. There is something very exciting for Somalis to embrace, which is to do the archaeological and the excavatory work of really, you know, going beyond kind of some of the reasons we all have to conceal certain stories and to appropriate other stories and claim certain histories and deny other histories. And everybody does it. You know, we're all guilty of that to some degree. But for those that are kind of not bothered about that, really, I think one of the advantages of the diaspora is that kind of can approach it with a pretty open hand, is that there is so much to learn. You know, there's so much to learn. I mean, I only discovered recently that there's been 170,000 archaeological digs done by the British and the French just in the northern part of Somalia, the northern part of the Horn of Africa, since the 1880s. And I would challenge I would guess that most people have no idea what any of those 170,000 archaeological digs produced. It's very little that's been written about it, but 170,000 archaeological digs suggests that there are a lot of people who are very interested in our stories, but are not very interested in publishing some of the data that comes out of them, right? So there's work for us to do. You know, there's a lot of work for us to do because there's a lot of history there. I mean, we're not just an oral tradition, right? We get kind of given this story of, oh, Somalis only had a written language in the 70s. It's bullshit, you know, pardon my language. You know, there's like ancient Sabbatean writings that get discovered all the time. You know, Somalis have used several written scripts over millennia. And that's just one little feature of some of the research that some very amateur but some really committed scholars online are doing, as well as some serious scholars as well. So, yeah, there's that question is an open question, and I'm very interested to see how the coming generations embrace the task of grappling with the question of what stories do we keep and what stories do we pass on and what stories do we perhaps not? I don't know. You know, that's an individual question for everybody, but it's going to be very interesting to see where that leads, because there's a lot of history that we unfortunately are not fully aware of. And in the history are the stories. You know, like in that the history will guide literature and cultural developments and, you know, ways of solving problems, even on a political level. I think the more we can understand where we've come from the last however many thousand years, and embrace the organic ways in which we would resolve tensions, we'll have a much better chance of actually moving forward with the problems that we've got today. Trying to use imposed systems of conflict resolution that don't make sense to us is part of the problem that we've seen since kind of 1960, really. So yeah, let's start digging for our own stories, guys.
Thank you very much. Amna, do you want to come back in on that at all? So sort of, yeah.
I don't think I'm savvy, but I can if you want.
Well, let's get back to that question of language then. So it's something which kind of gets it sort of weaves its way in quite distinct ways through everybody's books, whether it's the kind of Somali that we've been talking about in Manafai, which is kind of very attuned to this everyday language, and kind of both sort of the internal monologues as well as the kind of sort of conversations that people have as well, and also the kind of ways in which we kind of have reflections on language in your book, Amna, also in Salutation Road, and it's kind of weaves its way through with the multilingualism of yours as well, Samatar. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about your thinking about language and the experience of kind of living across and between languages, and whether that's through the process of translation, but also in kind of your experiences too.
So my main thinking with language while writing Scattered was that I was born and I learned my first language is Somali, and what's happened a lot for a lot of child Somali refugees like myself is we come to the UK and the English pushes out the Somali from my head. I was able to hold on to the Arabic, alhamdulillah, but I can understand when someone's speaking to me in Somali, but I struggle to be able to speak it back to them, and I feel really embarrassed and shy, and I don't know why it's happened. So as part of the book, I actually contacted some linguistic researchers to ask them, is this, I know loads of people who are second, third generation like me who can, understand when their mum is talking to them in Somali and they speak back in English. And they said it's called first language attrition, which is basically the process of forgetting your mother tongue. And it's quite interesting to see why that happens. So for us, the majority, so my mum's Yemeni, Somali, so majority of that side of the family live in London, and we all speak Arabic. So because I'm in an Arabic speaking household, I was able to hold on to it. But my dad didn't really speak to us in Somali. He was very keen to us to pick up English when we came here. So all his kids only speak English, and now that he's going to retire, he's very annoyed that we don't speak Somali. He's very unhappy, which we say, Baba, whose fault? But I was really, again, when I did that interview with him in his father's home, and I was doing the interview in Somali, that I felt this real loss between us and between the relationship that we have. And me and my brother, we have a great relationship. We argue a lot about politics because I'm extremely left-wing and he's not. But he likes that, he's always encouraged that in our household. But I was really, as sad as it sounds, it was, really until that moment where I said, what would we be arguing about in Somali? And then he said, probably politics. I was like, yes, probably taxes. But the fact that we can't do that made me realize there is just a whole avenue of our relationship that has been lost to the war and the refugee process. So I am trying to learn as much as possible Somali. It's a bit hard with a full-time job and a new baby, but that has made it much more imperative. It was very keen to be able to pass something on to my child about his Somali heritage. So, it's very small. I just essentially just say, hi, hoyo, mafiante. But we're getting there, and there's a lot more classes as well available to us. So I think, I've been thinking a lot about how trauma has impacted that as well, where what my brain decided to shut off, and what my brain wanted to hold on to. So that's kind of the mediation and language that I still think about a lot.
Thank you so much. Samatar, Muna, I don't know if either of you want to come back on this. Yeah, Muna.
Thank you. It's really interesting because, Manafai is language is at the heart of Manafai. And, in the original version of Somali, there's a lot of Mogadishu kind of ways of speaking, the dialect and that kind of, the rhythm of it, and you become immersed in that, and you can see the characters speaking to each other, and the English version tells the story very well, but but that language of belonging is quite interesting. To that sound of belonging, that makes me think about the experience of living between or across languages, and I think that it's an experience that sometimes, English for me, I can say, and sometimes a Somali diaspora feel that English is a language that we're fluent in, but I'm fluent. My fluency is in English, but I feel in Somali, and I like the sound of that. I can definitely relate to that as Somali diaspora, and that kind of, that reading of the English version of Mana Fai bridges that gap between fluency and feeling for me, which is amazing. It's interesting to think of what can be lost in language, but also can be glimpsed in translation, which is definitely a gift to have. And that gap that can be bridged with curiosity. I think that's quite important for Somali diaspora to have that curiosity and to really engage with bridging that gap, because certain things that can be in the language when it's translated to English can be lost, but we don't just lose the language itself, we lose the way that the words make us see the world, like our sight through the language. So it's definitely something that needs to be bridged.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Samatar.
I think language is critical. I echo everything that has kind of been said so far, but language is everything. Culture is essentially the doorway into it, and then the house it rests in, right? The culture is language, and so it's very difficult to fully appreciate a culture if you don't have a command of the language. That being said, I grew up in a mixed race home, and not in a multicultural part of the country like Bethnal Green or Tower Hamlets, say. I grew up in Hull in the 80s and 90s, and it was a very racist place to grow up, and there wasn't a lot of, there was my family and another family that was Somali, and that was pretty much it. So we were fighting the whole time. It was violent, and that developed a certain, I guess, resilience, but also a decision was made for me and my siblings. We'll never ever beg to be British, ever. And that's from being that small. Because I grew up in a home where my nana's white, my yaya's black. My mum's black, but she's lighter than me. My dad's the one who's half, and he looks like Robert De Niro when he was a kid, right? So I don't know, you know what I mean? It's a very confusing place, right? My Uncle Phil was there. There was an Iranian family that was lodging in one of the rooms. My brother Adam looks Malaysian, who's a year younger than me. So I had no concept of race whatsoever. I thought this was the norm. I didn't look at myself and see a colour. And then I went to school, and it was mad. I'm going to leave it there. All right? So that explains some of my prickliness, perhaps, and some of my kind of resentments, It's deep. I'm not making an excuse for it. I could do with some therapy, but I'd never take it, though. But so language for me was a way of, because I was like, I'm Somali. If people are like, where are you from? No, where are you really from? You're not going to get to the second question with me. Where are you from? Somalia. Never been there. Don't know what it looks like. Where are you from? I'm Somali. Simple. I better learn the language then. Right? Because when we did go to Somalia, what did we get? What galada, alla galada. Right? Can't win. Can't win. Enemy everywhere. So, need to master both languages. Need to master both languages. You know, language is a sword and a shield. You need, you know, and you need both, because the world can be quite a hostile place. So, but my Nana Pat, God rest her soul, Allah yarhamha, she was an Irish woman. I think things might have been different if she was an English woman, but she's an Irish woman. And so she encouraged it as well. She didn't really help. She was like, no, you're Somali, don't it, you know. She was more militant than anyone else in my entire family. And she really made sure that we learnt Somali. So it became a language of kind of protection. You know, when you don't have access to a community, when you don't have access to this land, that, you know, that having the language, and then every time you meet people come around, they'd be like, wow, mashallah, well, I have Somali go to war here, so they wallah. Like, I'm not going to tell you what I could have, right? So they're praising you, and you're getting the approval from it. You're like, yeah, we're doing well with Somali. You know.
Thank you very much. I think at this point, let's open it up for questions. I'm going to shade my eyes so I can kind of see out into the audience. But yeah, so over here, yes. Go. Yeah, please just stand up and, yeah.
You guys have made a very important point that, well, first let me thank you for this, like, what is it doing?
We have a mic for you. Here we go.
That's okay. No, speak now. Okay, so thank you so much for this talk. And just to, like, kind of draw a picture, what's published by, like, you know, Somali literature that is accessible to us is actually quite minimal, generally being art, history, theology, etc. But there is a lot of material out there that is incredibly decentralized. Like, you will have one day on a random Tuesday, you'll find an obscure blog where someone had uploaded pictures of their great grandparents with their life stories on it, and then you'll never see it again. That's how, like, decentralized it is. So, are there avenues and ways where people can submit things so we can actually have them saved somewhere before it goes to die, just like in the internet graveyard somewhere? The second question I also had is a lot of this touches on being on identity, but also on the topic of, like, being third generation culture kid. Like, it is the idea of a diaspora, but it's an idea of a diaspora that is diverging from the one that is back home. Are there ways where we can, like, reconnect the two before they diverge too far and become two different cultures? Thank you.
I can take the archiving question because that's less hard. I think that's a brilliant question, and that I've been looking for something similar, particularly while I was doing the research for my book, and we see it with other communities where there has been, like, local funding or local community fundraising to see what, like, different family branches, or like, for example, it's really quite common within the Jewish community to see different, like, genealogical research. I don't know of any of what you're speaking of. I'm desperate for it, so I think this kind of festival is the place to shout that out and hear if anyone's doing it. But I'd be really, really interested in coming together and setting something like that up and seeing where it could go, because there is a generation that was going to be lost soon, and we need to actually work quite quickly to hone in on those stories and put them down. So I think it would be something quite collaborative and community led, and then suddenly we'd all be like, no, that was my granddad. So I definitely, I don't know if any of you guys know of any, but I think it's so needed. So yeah, definitely.
I was actually thinking before I got sidetracked in my earlier on with the whole thing, but, like, there's this kind of obsession within our culture in particular of a kind of, like, idea of an ideal, right? And all cultures and languages evolve, constantly evolving. And I think that's kind of what I alluded to earlier on. Like, I looked at my grandparents as being like, oh, that's the thing. Like, that generation is like the OG original Somali. Like, that's what a Somali is. And it's not. Like, 100 years before them, they will have been completely alien to the people 100 years before, because there's a whole history of colonization. There's already, like, you know, westernization, the kind of the monoculturization of you know, that's a product of globalization. A lot of Asians, sorry. But ultimately, like, we have to embrace, as well as a real concern and interest with preserving that past and like, you know, securing our heritage. Also that, like, you know, we had this discussion before, like, we're also architects of what it is to be a Somali, you know, and like, we shouldn't be afraid to participate in that story, because the diaspora is a massive part of the story, right? And even from a kind of a religious point of view, we wouldn't be here if Allah didn't intend for it to happen. We're not aberrations to the story of being a Somali, right? We are a logical part of its development, you know. We're just as Somali as the Somalis anywhere and at any time. Yeah. And the language will develop. You know, if you look at, like, Shakespearean, well, even go before that, earlier than that, like Chaucerian English, it's like, yeah, it's changed, you know, like, it's changed a lot, and it will continue to change. And we've enhanced, you know, the diaspora, the global kind of culture, Anglophone culture, has enhanced the English language, evidenced by, you know, we're here, right? A whole bunch, you know, Ayan, mashallah, tabarakallah, has, like, seen how many different writers from the Anglophone world writing in English in every different form of the arts and culture, contributing to the enriching of the Anglophone culture, right? And also doing the same for the Somali culture as well, because alhamdulillah, we've not said we're just English now. You know what I mean? We're saying we're also Somali, right? So, I think, yeah, you know, we should be confident, right? That, like, the story doesn't end with us, right? It kind of continues through us, and it will do. And even our Chachab of Somali, right, is valid. It's a valid form of the language, and we'll introduce new lexical items into it. We'll introduce new phrases, right? And that's how languages develop. So embrace it. Like, if we trip up in certain grammar, just keep using the language, because it won't sound the same in 100 years' time anyway. You know what I mean?
Marina, do you want to?
I mean, I think you said it perfectly. I can 100% agree. 100% agree.
Thanks. Yes, we have a question right here at the front, and then, so please.
Comment and maybe a question. I just want to comment on how brave you all are in terms of the diaspora Somalis. Yes, you are Somalis. Like your Irish grandma said, you are Somali. There is no getting away from being Somali, by the way, whether you speak the language or not. You're somebody's child. You're from a certain clan. There is another sub-clan. There are people who are counting you that you might not even know. So, yeah, you can't get away from being Somali, but I really admire the bridging part. I just want to also, you know, I raise kids in the diaspora who are struggling with Somali language. They are Somalis. They are not even half Somali. They are supposedly full Somali, but struggling because they were going to daycare and school. And I remember my 3-year-old looking at me one night confused because I was shouting orders in Somali in the kitchen. And he looked at me and he said, "Mom, you sound upset. What's wrong?" So I said, "You didn't understand anything I said to you the last 10 minutes?" He said, "No, but you sound upset." So I remember in my kitchen switching to English with them because you have to get through the day and get them to do what they have to do. And now, you know, he's as Somali as they come. So he says, "I need to learn Somali because every other I see is chatting me up in Somali because he can see I'm Somali, but I can't understand half of what he's saying." So language then, yes, it is the door. But what I really admire about the bridging and Manafai, and I'm the Jill that, you know, when Dahir Afrah was writing, I was in school in Mogadishu. It is with something you can bridge, but there is going to be some emotions that are lost. And I remember, as a language teacher reading a child, an immigrant child from Poland, writing about her experience, saying that the language, the Polish she knew was too childish to describe her emotions as a teenager. And the English was too foreign to capture her emotions. So to me, bridging is beautiful and we can master English all we want. But when you really want to capture the emotions, something is going to get lost. But to kind of not give up and bridge, as you said, Mona, and thank you for writing Manafai in English, because it does have the texture and the language and the emotions of, Mogadishu and Hamar in the 70s. So I'll definitely buy it for my children and lecture them in reading it. But yeah, I mean, let's speak about how to, the identity is not going away. We're Somalis no matter how far we get. But it is capturing the emotions and also bridging, not just the archiving, but the writing. Like I'm back in the Somali region now, and there is amazing, amazing talent of art, but it's not written. And they're not writing it. They're just verbose, and they're so talented. They're just saying poems left, right, and center. How can we take the archiving aspect to it, but also the writing it? Because, unless we write it, those who have the gifts can live so long, yeah?
I'm happy to comment on your great comments. It's interesting. It was made me think about, because Somali was my first language as well. That I was born here. Before I went to school, my mum would tell me I'd go to school and say, "Can I use the bathroom?" I would say in Somali. And then the teacher's looking at you like, "What do you want?" And you get stressed and you're trying to figure out how to say it and, very confused, between the two languages. And even my father, Mohammed Afrah, he would say to us when we were really young, "Right, now is dinner time. We're sitting around the table having dinner. I don't want to hear a word of English. I want you to all practice." We'll be all talking in English, me, my sister, my brother. And he'd say, "Now is time. I want you to practice your Somali. I don't want to hear one word of English. You're going to practice Somali now." Suddenly, a great silence would fall around the table. No one wants to talk because they were scared. We were like, "Oh, what if we make a mistake?" Become self-conscious about ourselves. But at the same time, I still remember those lessons and how important it felt to him. And, when I did go to Somalia, when he took us there, stayed for a month in the summer, that was when I learned Somali, to be honest, when I was completely immersed. He tried his best, like he'd sit with us, write with us, tell us there's Somali time, but actually to be completely immersed for a month in Somalia, actually, I found it very difficult to go back to English, So again, it was difficult to kind of balance the two, but that immersion, and that sense of, it was like it flew off my tongue because it was there already from the roots as a first language. So yeah, I think it's a very challenging question. It's challenging for that generation. It's also challenging for Somali diaspora to know, what are the best ways to pass this on to keep and protect that connection.
Thank you. Yeah.
I would just say there's definitely a link between the two questions earlier on and a real need for a kind of a massive international archival project. And there'll definitely be a ton of funding for that, so maybe I'm looking at Ayan now because, and there are Somali museums, internationally as well. I know there's one starting in London, inshallah, soon. There's one in Minnesota, Melbourne. So there's room for an international consortium that will work very closely with universities across the Horn of Africa. But it's going to take a lot of coordination, and that is someone with kind of the coordinational talent to bring all that together, but yeah, but I mean, also for individuals, if that's something you're passionate about, there's you can get very small bits of funding. I know the Churchill Foundation offer funds of up to £10,000, if I'm not mistaken, and you can kind of, what it requires you to do is to have a project plan that allows you to go abroad to bring technical or kind of experiential expertise to bring back to benefit the community. So that's kind of more for individuals. So that is a way to get that kind of a project started, as well as all the various kind of Arts Council fundings and things like that. So that's just generally to everybody. If you've got an idea, do it. Don't wait for anybody else. Do it. Try it. And there's always little bits and pieces of funding available for stuff like that. Yeah.
Amna, did you want to come in?
Yeah. Just to come back onto your question about how do we encourage more young Somalis to write? I heard this phrase, it doesn't have to be good, it just has to be there. I think that was so encouraging for me when I first started on, the journey to write Scattered. I kept thinking, I'm not ready to write this story. I'm only 28. This is such a big story. This is my family story. And my dad said, what are you waiting for? We can die tomorrow, which is the way he is normally. So I think sometimes you just need those of us, particularly who have written books, or just every time I speak to anyone who's telling me, I'm thinking about writing a story, I give them an email address, let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Just write, because I'm sure it's going to be great. You just need someone to push you off that ledge. So I'm seeing much more people just experiment and just write and do much more creative things. And mashallah, especially in our community, we've just got such a pool of talent. So I'm hoping that as more people begin to see faces like ours, faces like Nadifa Mohammed, winning these huge awards, they're going to see themselves in those positions and feel the kind of confidence to go. But anyone that's young and that asks me, what should I do? And I'm like, go home and immediately start writing.
Thank you. Yes, I am.
I think it's fair to say, in terms of the UK, the work Numbi Art's doing in terms of archiving, I think it's very interesting. I think anything that you can contribute to that would be important, because it's in absence of something that you really like. I think you need to do with what we have already. Second thing is, I'm actually personally not for diaspora collecting something like you're saying, something major museum in the diaspora. I think those items, photography, whatever it is, it belongs to Somali region. So I know anything I found from Somaliland, I say take them to Somaliland Museum. That's what it belongs to. I remember I met someone in Cardiff and he had a huge collection of photography and history of when people arrived there and the grandma. These are people's family. I don't think any British museum should hold those photographies. So I said, why not donate to Somaliland Museum, because we have a museum now, and I'm sure it's the same thing in Chikchiga, the same thing in Mogadishu. I don't believe this thing we need to alienate from the roots, and we need to bring it back where it belongs. So that is my personal opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayan. Yes, other questions? So up behind, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories. It's very inspiring to listen to all of you. My question is for Amna. Amna, when you went to Mogadishu and you were with your father and you have seen your father's his thoughts and experience when he showed you his father's house, can you please share with us how your understanding of homeland and home-like spaces have changed? if they change? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very beautiful question. Thank you. I never really thought much about what my father had to give up to leave Somalia, because I only ever really thought of the forced migration process of how lucky we were. And we are, you know, you can see the refugee crisis now and the increasing temperature and hate that we're having towards refugee communities. I think about how lucky we were when we slipped in the 90s, but I never thought too much about the loss of his home, of his comfort to be able to speak in his language to the people around him. In the book, I write that he looked younger. You know, he was so joyful, and he's a very happy man in London as well, but there was this lightness and almost childlike joy around him. Particularly with my parents and their generation, when they came here, the real big focus was ensuring that, like, we held on to our religion. So one of the main things my mum and my dad really wanted to make sure that continued to pass on was that we were Muslim. That I actually think so much of everything else outside of that, there wasn't really much thought given to it. And if you think about, like, the communities that we had been, like, we've migrated to, it was like these really impoverished areas in Barking, Birmingham, and I know, like, I should say Somali migration to the UK goes much, much further than the 90s. I just represent the big one. But the focus was always on Islam, which is really, really important, you know, alhamdulillah, that was passed on. But I grow quite frustrated that I was like, okay, I'm Muslim, and I also, you know, I look Somali. I am Somali, and that hasn't been passed on. But I do think there's a big correction happening to that now. And also, you know, a lot of the work we do at The Guardian with community affairs is reporting on, like, it's much more broad brush, you know, the Black British community or the Asian. I'm so astonished at how much this work is just happening now. Like that archival work on Black British history, and you're seeing it a lot when we did just a piece now on the Nigerian community and its relationship with Britain. It's all really just happening in the past 5 years. So yeah, I really don't feel disheartened, because they kept those gates closed for as long as possible, and it was really us bursting through in the manner that we have. And then they push back and we push back, you know, that's all, you know, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But they have really limited our ability to do this history. And now it becomes, you know, the far right are on the rise in this country, and they're really contesting whether we should be learning this history or not, or whether it's our history or not. So I think it's deeply politicized. There's been a specific reason why maybe in my generation it wasn't being passed on, but at the same time there's this really exciting and interesting frontier of this work being done. I mean, something just as simple as, can we just get a bibliography of, like, all this written work, break it down by genre? Just like, you know, I'm a huge fantasy nerd, so I'd love to be able to read what you say, like non-Western canon and that. And it's so nice that actually, when you think your pain, and, you know, there's that James Baldwin quote, you think, you know, you're the only person in history that's ever felt this way, and then you open a book. I feel like I'm the only Somali person that is going through this, and then I open a Somali book. So it's, yeah, I think it's much needed, and so many of us here and in this room feel that urgency that you do.
Just a quick one on the focus on kind of the Islamic identity, which alhamdulillah, right? But this is one of the reasons why I keep going back to 1884, is because I don't know if we as a culture are very good at kind of like processing like things that have happened. I don't think any culture is. You know, when have we had the conversation in the UK about COVID? You know, a lockdown. Like it happened, oh, let's get on with it. You know, for those of us who grew up here, we grew up like with every member of our family who had come from Somalia watching Somali TV in the 90s, right? Every year was, we're going home next year. Every year was, we're going home next year. Suitcases were packed. This was not a group of people that thought they were going to stay here. They had no intention to, right? This is a group of people that had their entire lives ripped from them. And that, for us who were born and raised here, is really difficult for us to get. You know, when you, like, every one of my uncles, every single one of them is gutted, right? Not only because they saw some horrific stuff, right? But because one of them was 2 years into college, becoming a nurse. The other one was like, had dreams of becoming an accountant. This one had this going on, that going on. War kicks off. You go to a different part of the world where you don't speak a language. You have no access to status that you might have had. Everything you'd been working towards, gone. And where do you begin? From the absolute bottom, in a place where you're not welcome, people don't want you, and all your dreams have just been shattered. Right? How do you stand as a man or as a woman or how do you look at your children with any kind of, like, you know, I'm proud of who I am when you're defeated? Every single, like, and that's why I come back to 1884. Because whatever we want to talk, however we want to sell it to ourselves, we were colonized. Be it a protectorate in some regions, there was a meeting in Berlin and the world powers went, you take that, France, you can have that, we'll have this, boom, boom, boom. This is why Islam becomes the identity that we return to. Because in the psyche, in every member of that generation, whether we admitted it or not, we were defeated. And how do you process that? There is a defeat, right? There is a group of people with stronger weapons, with a different culture, with a different racial identity, with a sense of racial superiority, right, that are here, can essentially do what they like. So being a Somali was no longer enough, right? You had to cling on to something, which is why the first major revolt against colonization was the Sayyid, right? Because the last thing you can go back to is the salvation that you might not see in this life, but you will see in the one after, right? The only thing that I can say I might have some kind of edge over the colonizer is my religion. Whether it's right or wrong, I'm not making a value judgment, right? But I can't make any other claim. You've got guns I don't. You've got ships I don't have. You've got armies I don't have. I can't say I'm better than you as a way to console myself in any other frame of reference other than I have my religion. I can't lose that, right? And so when our parents came here, it's the same thing. It's like, you have to, you know, go to Duxi, go to Mal'amad, right? And this becomes a question. This is all part of the post-colonial legacy, right? That we don't know we don't have a common language for expressing. Right? It's started in long before anybody in this room was ever born, right? And it will continue until we understand why. And that's where we'll get the stories from. Because life didn't start in 1884 or 1990 or 1981 or 1992, right? The Somalis are a Neolithic people, you know. Its language is very old and its stories are ancient. So it's up to us to do that healing work, you know, and understand why things have been hidden and why certain things are the case, you know. It's very easy for us to dismiss that generation like as oh, you know, they're so jahil, or they're this, or they're that, or my uncle, he don't do no work, or this one, you know, he's... No, like, they suffered. They suffered a lot, you know. So, yeah, let's be the architects of the next stage as well. Find them stories, tell our stories, and reclaim a lot which is there to be reclaimed.
Could add something really brief to both of your really great points on this topic, because I've shared your frustration as well, and about loss. You know, just in recent Somali history, in terms of, you know, the war, a lot is lost in war, and a lot of is lost as well in displacement of people. But when something is lost, it can also be found, I believe. When things are calm and we're not worried about survival anymore, and, you know, we've got that privilege of that calm space. Those things that, because they existed before, they can exist again. I believe that, and they can be found again. So I've definitely got a lot of hope and a lot of curiosity on that topic.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'm being given the signal that our time is up. But before we wrap up, could we thank our three speakers again for a really fascinating evening conversation?